Hey guys, welcome back to science. This is going to be an interesting way for us to do our lessons, but nevertheless we will push forward. For those who don't know me, my name is Mr. Lead. I'm one of the Year 8 science teachers. If this is your first time getting to know me, you're getting to know me on a more deeper level by getting to witness my bedroom. So I'm glad that you could see that. Nevertheless, we're going to push forward. We're going to keep learning the topic of body systems. I'd like to also take the time to say, because we're not in our normal routine and we're not in our normal setup of having a teacher at the front and you guys all in the classroom, that makes the dynamic of us teachers being able to help you a lot trickier. It makes it a lot harder. It means that there's a lot more onus on a lot more of the onus is on you guys to contact us and let us know if you have any questions whatsoever. And I'm really serious about this. If you are unsure of something, normally in the classroom, you'd probably put up your hand and just get us to explain that. You can't do that here. So any questions whatsoever, please email your teacher or message your teacher. Do whatever you can. If it's a private question, feel free to email. But please ask us. We are here to help and we're here to answer your questions. Now, with that being said, let's get back into our topic of body systems. So, the next system we're moving on to and learning about is called the respiratory system. Circulatory is coming later. The respiratory system is for breathing and respiration. If you haven't got your notes out, get out your notes so you can start filling in the blanks. So, before we understand what the respiratory system is, we need to understand that all living things need energy. And all living things get energy from respiration. Now, for us humans, this is how we do it. We take in oxygen and glucose, and we convert that to carbon dioxide, water, and energy. All right. So glucose we get from our digestive system. That's glucose can be obtained from those three main nutrients we talked about in previous lessons. If you can remember them, they're carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Carbohydrates are full of glucose, absolutely full. Proteins have a lot of glucose. Fats don't have as much, but still we can get glucose from all of those things. Oxygen, on the other hand, we need to get from our respiratory system. So that's why we have a respiratory system. So it's responsible for diffusing oxygen in our blood and excreting out carbon dioxide. Okay? So our blood, as you'll learn later, is a network that carries oxygen around to where it's needed, because we need to convert that oxygen with glucose into energy. And that's done in the mitochondria, as you might know. So, some questions I've had in my class already is, what happens when food goes down your throat? Shouldn't that go down into your lungs? To answer that question, what you need to understand is that this is what the respiratory system looks like. It's a pipeway that connects our nasal cavity and mouth all the way down to our lungs. But this pipeway is actually split into two. There's one pipeway that goes down to our stomach, and that's the esophagus, and the other pipeway is called the trachea. And the trachea is actually blocked off by a little flap called the epiglottis. Now, it is possible for food to go down the trachea, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But just understand, if you're trying to mentally picture what the respiratory system looks like, it looks like this, but there's another pipeway that goes to our stomach. They're two separate pipeways, all right? Now, to carry on, like I said, our blood system is responsible for carrying oxygen around, and it's also responsible for carrying carbon dioxide back to our lungs to excrete out, because too much carbon dioxide is a bad thing. Now, the nasal cavity is part of our respiratory system, and it's a very essential part because most of the breathing you do is through your nose. Now, the nasal cavity has the job of basically cleaning the air and trapping any pathogens or unwanted particles in the mucus. So your snot in your nasal cavity actually plays a very important role. What your snot does, or your mucus does, and also what cilia does. Cilia are like microscopic little hairs that are trapped in, that are in your nose. What your snot, your mucus, and cilia, what all that does is it helps stop particles that enter your nose that you don't want entering into your nose. So that could be dust, or it could be pathogens like germs, just any particles whatsoever. So that's those cilia stop any particles, and what happens then is it gets trapped in the mucus, and then your mucus you're either going to blow out of your nose, so that's getting rid of all that unwanted stuff. You either blow it out of your nose, or you swallow it down into your stomach. And that's a good thing because your stomach acid is designed to break down any pathogens or unwanted stuff. So that's the purpose of the nasal cavity. The next part of the respiratory system is the trachea. Like I said, trachea, that's the pipe, the wind-pipe, but the trachea is the more official term that I want you guys to remember. So the trachea leads down into the lungs, and the lungs is filled with little tiny sacs called alveoli. And alveoli are little tiny sacs that are branched off from bronchi. So we got a picture here of some lungs. It's a really big misconception among a lot of people that lots of people think that lungs are just big empty balloons, like big empty bags or big empty balloons, bags of gas within our bodies. That is not what the lungs are like at all. This picture doesn't really explain the lungs fully to justice, but it does show that our lungs are filled with not just blank empty space, but they're actually filled with tiny little sacs, and those little sacs are filled with blank empty space. But these sacs are tiny. All the walls of these alveoli are 1 cell thick. Okay, we learned about cells in the last topic. Think about how small cells are. That's how small these alveoli are. And this is where our gas exchange happens. This is where we breathe in oxygen, and it's put into the blood, and then the blood exchanges it swaps it for carbon dioxide. That all happens in these tiny little sacs, which are branched off in these bigger branches called bronchioles, which are branched off into even bigger branches called bronchi, which are all found in the lung. So to get a better picture of what this looks like, I have a picture that I've just found from Google Images. Fair warning, for the squeamish, it might look a little graphic, but it's really educational, so here you go. This is what our lungs look like in real life. Our lungs are not big empty gas sacs, okay? They're full of all these tiny little sections called alveoli, and that's what they look like all packed together. So people ask, what happens if you get food down in your lungs? Well, remember, our lungs are not giant big gas sacs, so it's not like we're going to have food rolling around down at the bottom. But it is actually still possible to get food stuck in there, and that's something called pulmonary aspiration. Normally that doesn't happen because our body is really good at choking and pushing that food right back out. But nevertheless, food does still get stuck down there, and water can get stuck down there, and that's a serious disease if that ever happens. So, main thing to remember here is what lungs are actually made of. They're made of alveoli, and alveoli are so tiny that when you pack them all together, the lungs are not a giant big gas bag. They're made of all those alveoli are packed together to look a little bit more like this. And they still can fill up with water. They still can fill up with food. It's a lot harder to do so than you'd probably think. So, smoking is another way to cause damage to your lungs. Just think about all those tiny little alveoli. They're so tiny and so fragile. Imagine the effect that smoking out filling those little gas bubbles of alveoli, filling them up with smoke. Imagine what sort of effect that has. So this is what happens to lungs. when lungs are damaged from smoke, it's because all those alveoli are being killed off. We're losing our ability to breathe. And so when we lose our ability to breathe, we lose our ability to transfer energy throughout our body. And that causes a lot of cancer and a lot of diseases in other organs as well. Now, gas exchange. So this was the term I mentioned before to explain what happens in the alveoli. Gas exchange is the swapping out of oxygen for carbon dioxide. Okay? So you can observe gas exchange by looking at the color of blood. Blood that has oxygen is a bright red, whereas blood that doesn't have oxygen is a dimmer red. There's a misconception that blood that doesn't have oxygen is blue. This is not the case. Blood that doesn't have oxygen is just blue in diagrams, but in real life it's just going to be a dimmer red. It's not going to look blue or anything like that. But yeah, this is what gas exchange is. It's the swapping out of two different types of gases. And if you look at the maths here, if you look at what our inhaled air consists of and what our exhaled air consists of, there's a 3% difference in the amount of oxygen and the amount of carbon dioxide. Only 3% of what we breathe in is actually used. A lot of air is just useless, nothing, nitrogen. But we are so used to this composition of air that if we have too much oxygen, that can actually be poisonous to us, and that can be deadly. Same for if there's too much carbon dioxide or too much nitrogen. So one more thing to remember when it comes to breathing and respiration is how we actually breathe. We use a muscle called the diaphragm to help our lungs work. So the diaphragm is a big muscle that sits underneath our lungs, and it basically squeezes the lungs so that it brings air in and out. So when the diaphragm contracts, the muscles are more open and more relaxed, so air flows in. But when the diaphragm relaxes, it forces the lungs to squeeze and forces the air out. You can sort of think of this as like squeezing a water bottle, okay? So if I squeeze it, I get air squeezed out at me. But if I relax it, air is squeezed back in. And our lungs work exactly the same way. Now, this all begs the question, okay, this is all well and good, but how come sometimes we need to breathe faster and sometimes we don't? Well, when you think about the purpose of lungs, the purpose is to provide more oxygen into our bloodstream, which provides more energy to our body. When we are exercising, we need more energy. So that is why we're breathing faster. We're breathing faster, so we're getting more oxygen into our bloodstream, which gets more oxygen into the cells around our body, which gets more of that cellular respiration happening that we talked about at the start, cellular respiration occurring in the mitochondria, which means our cells are producing more energy. So that's why we need to breathe more when we exercise. And that's also why our heart rate goes up, because our blood needs to move that around the body even faster. Okay. So that's it for the respiratory system. Once again, if you have any questions, please contact us teachers. Otherwise, I'm going to leave. There's going to be some work left on sector for you guys to do. And yeah, have a good one, guys.